Section 1. General characteristics. General description. The F-8L Falco is a two-seat aircraft with side-by-side seating for the pilot and passenger and provisions for adding a third seat in the luggage compartment behind the pilot and passenger seat. This third seat is limited to a maximum weight of 90 pounds. The engine is the 150, 160 or 180 horsepower Lycoming. Constant speed or fixed pitch propellers may be installed. The tricycle landing gear is retractable, operated by a single electric motor which drives screwjacks to each of the gear legs. A hand crank is provided for emergency operation. The hand crank is located under a cover on the console between the pilot and passenger seats. Dual control sticks are provided, and the stick on the right side is removable to allow for freedom of movement for the passenger. The control system transfers the control forces of the sticks to the ailerons and elevator via pushrods and control cables. Rudder pedals are provided for both pilot and passenger. The rudder pedals are connected to the steerable nose gear and rudder with control cables. When the landing gear is retracted, the nose gear is automatically disengaged from the control system. Brakes are provided for the pilot only, and a parking brake valve is located in the console between the pilot's and passenger seats. An elevator trim tab is provided, and it is operated by a trim control wheel located in the console between the pilot's and passenger seats. The elevator trim control wheel is attached to an angle drive which operates a screwjack. The motion of the screwjack is transmitted to the elevator tab by a single push-pull control cable. An indicator for the elevator trim is located to the left of the trim tab control wheel. The Falco is provided with large effective flaps for landing and takeoff. The flaps are controlled by an electric actuator. The flap switch has a shaped handle and is located below the throttle quadrant. The FLAP indicator is located to the left of the flap switch. The flaps are set to the desired angle by holding the FLAP switch down or up. Due to the design of the actuator will freewheel when the flaps reach the end of their limits. This freewheeling does not cause any damage to the actuator. The engine controls consist of throttle, propeller and mixture control levers located in a center throttle quadrant. These controls are connected to the engine by Teflon-lined stainless steel push-pull control cables. A friction control knob is located on the left side of the throttle quadrant. An optional left-hand throttle may be installed. This left-hand throttle is connected to the center throttle by pushrods and a torque tube. Thus both throttles work together, and either may be used. Carburetor heat for carbureted engines or alternate air for fuel-injected engines are provided. The control is located below the center throttle quadrant. The landing gear switch is located on the left side of the instrument panel, thus inaccessible to the passenger. The switch has a wheel-shaped knob, and the switch is of the lever lock type to prevent the accidental operation of the switch. The landing gear switch has two positions, up and down, and the knob must be pulled out before the switch will move. The landing gear indicator lights are located at the top center of the instrument panel in the annunciator panel. A green light indicates that the landing gear is down. A red light indicates that the landing gear is in transit, specifically that the landing gear motor is running to retract or extend the landing gear. When the landing gear is fully retracted, both the red and green lights are extinguished. A yellow landing gear warning light is provided in the annunciator panel. In addition, a landing gear warning horn is located at the base of the center console panel, below the throttle quadrant. The landing gear circuit has a pitot pressure switch which senses airspeed. If gear up is selected below 68 knots, the warning horn will sound, the gear warning light will flash, and the landing gear will not retract. With the landing gear up, the warning light will flash and the warning horn will sound below 68 knots. F-8L Falco Flight Manual 1-1. L. Throttle and flap position switches are provided which sense landing configuration, and these are part of the landing gear circuit. The warning light will flash and the warning horn will flash when the flaps are lower to 17 degrees or when the throttle is reduced to 13 to 15 inches of manifold pressure. During some acrobatic maneuvers, the pilot's use of the throttle may cause the system to warn the pilot. The landing gear horn may be switched off for acrobatics. This switch is located in the annunciator panel along with a horn-off warning light. The landing gear warning light will continue to operate when the horn is switched off. The annunciator panel contains other warning lights as well. During takeoff and landing, only the green, gear down, light should be illuminated, and during normal flight all lights should be extinguished. Thus the annunciator panel provides a single glance to check for adverse conditions. Below the annunciator panel is a built-in audio panel providing for the selection of the microphone and avionics. The microphone push-to-talk switches are located on the two control sticks. Microphone and phone jacks are provided on each side of the instrument panel for the pilot and passenger headphones. A David Clark ICOM is normally installed on the right side of the instrument panel. This intercom allows for hands-free communication between pilot and passenger, and a transmit light is provided to indicate when the microphone push-to-talk switches are closed. Intercom bypass switches are located to the right of the intercom. These switches should be in the normal position. If the intercom is removed from the aircraft for service, the switches should be in the bypass position. In the bypass position, only the pilot's microphone push-to-talk switch will work. Power for the electrical system is furnished by a battery accessible from the exterior and a 14-watt 60 or 70 ampere alternator. The system is noise suppressed and is designed so that, in the event of alternator failure, all connected loads are adequately supplied until a landing can be made at the nearest airfield. An ammeter is provided to show the charge or discharge of the battery. An optional load reading ammeter shows the load on the alternator, and a voltmeter shows the voltage of the system and the state of the battery prior to starting. An optional alternator analyzer indicates a shorted stator winding or blown diodes in the alternator, allowing the pilot to reduce the electrical loads on the alternator and reduce the risk of an in-flight alternator failure. A high voltage warning light, white, is located in the annunciator panel, and this comes on if the system voltage reaches 15 volts. A low voltage warning light, yellow, in the annunciator panel comes on to indicate that the system voltage is below 13 volts, giving immediate indication of an alternator failure. The ignition switch is located to the bottom left of the instrument panel. To its right are the separate master and alternator switch. The master switch is provided with a green indicator light. The voltage regulator is set at 14 volts. In the event that the system voltage reaches 16 volts, the voltage regulator will automatically cut off the alternator. The voltage regulator may be reset by switching the alternator switch off and then back on. The electrical system is protected by circuit breakers, which are located on the bottom right side of the instrument panel. 6 of these are switch-type circuit breakers, each provided with an indicator light. When an excess load occurs, these circuit breakers automatically trip to the off position with the switch handle down. All of the other circuit breakers are of the push-pull type. This allows the pilot to disable any of the circuits. In addition, fuses are used elsewhere in the aircraft for circuit protection. The airspeed indicator is marked with the operating speeds of the aircraft. The white arc indicates the FLAP speeds. The white arc is stepped. Full flaps may be used only for the speeds indicated by the broad white arc, while 20 degrees of flaps may be used for the full range indicated by the white arc. The maximum landing gear retraction or extension speed is indicated by a small g. The maneuvering speeds are also indicated, mu for the utility category and mu for the acrobatic category. F8L Falco Flight Manual 1-2. L. The rate of climb and altimeter share the pitot static system of the airspeed indicator. The static ports are located on the sides of the fuselage tail cone. In the event that these two ports become clogged, an alternate static source is provided. This is located at the base of the instrument panel on the left. The alternate static source is a drain valve, and it is opened by pushing up and turning the two protruding rods to the locked open position. The pitot tube is located on the left wing and is heated. The switch for the pitot heat is located in the row of circuit breakers, and its yellow indicator light shows that the switch is on. The artificial horizon and direction gyro are of a special design for acrobatic flight, thus no special procedures are required for acrobatic flight. These two instruments are operated by the vacuum system, and a suction gauge is provided to the left of the airspeed indicator. A filter is provided to supply clean air to these instruments. This filter is located on the forward, away from the pilot, side of the instrument panel, directly in front of the master switch. The suction gauge is vented into the filter, thus the gauge is a proper differential gauge, indicating both a clogged filter or failure of the vacuum pump. The turn and bank is electric, and the switch is located in the row of circuit breakers. Its green indicator light is located above the switch, and this shows that the switch is on. Optionally, a Century Eye autopilot may be installed. The electric gyro in this autopilot is switched on an OFF by the turn and bank switch. The operation of the autopilot is controlled by a separate switch, normally installed near the top of the avionics stack. The autopilot may be coupled to the navigation radios, and a NAV1 NAV2 selector switch is located with it. This autopilot is entirely electric, thus as will continue to work in the event of a vacuum system failure. The tachometer and the manifold pressure, fuel pressure gauges are provided in the center of the instrument panel above the throttle quadrant. A cluster of instruments are provided below the flight instruments in front of the pilot. This cluster included the cylinder head temperature (CHT) gauge, the oil pressure temperature gauge, the oil temperature gauge, the ammeter, and the two fuel gauges. All of these instruments are electric and include internal lighting controlled by the light dimmer switch. The fuel gauges are marked in US gallons, and the red arc indicates the last 3 gallons in each tank for approximately 30 minutes of flight at low power settings. The aircraft may be equipped with a single-cylinder or 4-cylinder exhaust gas temperature gauge (EGT). As an option, the CHT may be a 4-cylinder gauge if it is wired through the switch for the 4-cylinder EGT. A Davtron clock timer may be installed. The flight time is connected to the landing gear circuit, thus the flight time is automatically timed from gear retraction to gear extension. The incandescent display is automatically dimmed. A silver fuel guard may be installed to precisely monitor the fuel flow and fuel usage. The fuel guard normally displays fuel flow, and fuel used may be indicated by holding down the switch. The incandescent display is manually dimmed with a switch on the fuel guard. A Davtron digital outside air temperature indicator may be installed. This is located on the right side of the instrument panel. The incandescent display is automatically dimmed. An accelerometer is normally provided on the left side of the instrument panel. This instrument has a green arc for the utility category. Red lines are provided for the utility category and for the acrobatic category, and each is marked with AU or A. A magnetic compass is provided above the instrument panel at the center of the airplane. The Falco is provided with dual circuits for the instrument panel lighting, and each is controlled with a solid-state dimmer. The combined switch dimmers are located on the right side of the instrument panel. The dimmers control the internal lighting of the cluster of instruments, most avionics, the ISOCOM, and the magnetic compass. The instrument panel is provided with post lights at the instruments. In addition, the glare shield has 4 lights which illuminate the instrument panel. F8L Falco Flight Manual 1-3. L. A full avionics installation may be installed. The marker beacon indicator is normally installed above the artificial horizon, and a switch is provided for dimming the lights. A landing light switch is located in the row of circuit breakers along with its white indicator light. The switches for the navigation and anti-collision strobe lights are located in the same area along with their blue indicator lights. The fuel selector valve is located below the throttle quadrant. The valve has 4 positions, 1 for each tank and 2 off positions, although the bottom off position is not normally used. An auxiliary electric fuel pump is provided for aircraft with fuel-injected engines. The switch is located in the row of circuit breakers along with its red indicator light. Placards on the instrument panel provide landing and takeoff checklists, flight limitations, and acrobatic entry speeds. Fresh air is provided from 2 vents located on each side of the cockpit below the instrument panel. Cabin heat is controlled by a knob located below the throttle quadrant. An optional windshield defrost system may be installed, controlled by a knob in the same location. The seats are adjustable fore and aft, and the seat or back cushions can be removed to accommodate a back type or seat type parachute. The restraint system consists of a 5-point harness for pilot and passenger. Each belt end may be individually inserted into the buckle. After takeoff, the 2 shoulder belts may be released by pressing on a metal tab on the upper back of the buckle. This allows the other belts to remain in place. Dimensions. Wings. Wing area 107.5 square featuring wingspan 26 feet 3 inches, aspect ratio 6.4, dihedral 5.5 degrees, washout 3 degrees. Airfoil, wing root NACA 642,212-1/2 airfoil, wingtip NACA 642,210. Ailerons. Percent of wingspan 38%, average relative chord 30%, movement 24 degrees up 16 degrees down, area each 3.45 square feet. FLAPS. Percent of wingspan 39%, average relative chord 30%. Movement neutral to 45 degrees down, surface area each 5.06 square feet. Fuselage. Overall length 21 feet 4 inches, interior width cockpit 4.0, height 7 feet 6 inches. F8L Falco Flight Manual 1-4. L. Horizontal tail surfaces. Span 9 feet 10.11 inches, total area 23.44 square featuring aspect ratio 4.1, fixed surface 14.44 square featuring movable surface 9 square featuring movement 22 degrees up 16 degrees down. Elevator trim tab. Surface area 0.39 square featuring movement 20 degrees up 20 degrees down. Vertical tail surfaces. Height 4 feet 2.6 inches, total area 10.88 square featuring movable surface 5.21 square featuring movement 20 degrees left 20 degrees right. Landing gear, main. Width 6 feet 10 inches, tire size 5.00x5 or 5.30x6, tire pressure 30 psi, oleo strut pressure 600 psi. Landing gear, nose. Tire size 11.4x5, tire pressure 30 psi, oleo strut pressure 115 psi. Engine. Lycoming IO320B1A. Nominal power 160 horsepower at 2700 rpm, cruising rpm 75% power. Cruising rpm 65% power. Propeller. Hartzell HCC2YL1BF F76634 with a 247619 spinner mounting kit installed, pitch setting at 30, station, load 13 degrees, height 30 degrees. Diameter 72. Spinner. Hartzell A22982. Fuel capacity. Front tank 21 US gallons, aft tank 19 US gallons, inverted header tank, if installed 2 US gallons. Grade of fuel. Avgas 91/96 minimum octane. Oil capacity 8 quarts. Oil used. Above 60 degrees Fahrenheit say 50-32 degrees Fahrenheit to 90 degrees Fahrenheit say 40-4 degrees Fahrenheit to 68 degrees Fahrenheit say 30, below 14 degrees Fahrenheit say 20. Note: mineral oil is recommended during engine brake in first 50 hours. F8L Falco Flight Manual 1-5. L. Instrumentation. Magnetic compass. Airspeed indicator. Artificial horizon. Altimeter. Turn and bank. Directional gyro. Rate of climb. Fuel pressure, manifold pressure. Tachometer. Cylinder head temperature gauge with internal lighting. 4CYL optional. Oil temperature gauge with internal lighting. Oil pressure gauge with internal lighting. Ammeter with internal lighting. Front fuel gauge with internal lighting. Aft fuel gauge with internal lighting. Suction gauge. Accelerometer. Diaphragm clock timer optional. Voltmeter alternator amps 60 or 70 amp. Exhaust gas temperature 4-cylinder optional. Silver fuel guard optional. Alternator analyzer optional. Low voltage monitor with indicator light yellow. High voltage monitor with indicator light white. Carburetor ice detector optional. Electrical equipment. Master switch with indicator light green. Alternator switch. Ignition switch with key combination magneto and starter switch. Alternator Prestollet 60 amp or 70 amp. Battery 12 volts, GIL PS6-11 35 amp per hour or gel, cell U 128 27 amp per hour, ammeter shunt 80 amp 100 megavolts. Alternator shunt 80 amp 50 megavolts. Voltage regulator, solid state with high voltage shut-off magnetos, dual impulse coupling or retard breaker, starter vibrator, for retard breaker magnetos only, master relay, with coil suppression diode. Starter relay, with coil suppression diode. Starter warning light red. Starter Prestollet 12 volt, geared a direct drive circuit breaker, 7.5 amp alternator field. Circuit breaker 10 amp fuel pump with indicator light red. Circuit breaker 10 amp pitot heat with indicator light yellow. Circuit breaker 5 amp turn and bank with indicator light green. Circuit breaker 10 amp strobes with indicator light blue. Circuit breaker 7.5 amp navigation lights with indicator light blue. Circuit breaker 10 amp landing light with indicator light white. Circuit breaker 15 amp landing gear actuation. Circuit breaker 5 amp landing gear indication. Circuit breaker 15 amp flaps. Circuit breaker 5 amp panel lights. Circuit breaker 5 amp panel lights. Circuit breaker 5 amp instrumentation. Circuit breaker 5 amp instrumentation. Circuit breaker 7.5 amp COM1 NAV1. Circuit breaker 7.5 amp COM2 NAV2. Circuit breaker 5 amp transponder altitude encoder F8L Falco flight manual 1 to 6. L. Circuit breaker 5 amp ADF DME. Circuit breaker 2 amp intercom fuel guard. Circuit breaker 5 amp marker beacon outside air temperature. Circuit breaker 7.5 amp auxiliary. Fuse 3 amp ammeter shunt 2 fuses. Fuse 3 amp alternator shunt 2 fuses. Fuse 3 amp landing gear motor 2 fuses. Fuse 3 amp starter warning light. Landing gear selector switch lever lock with shaped handle. Landing gear down indicator light green. Landing gear in transit indicator light red. Landing gear warning light yellow. Landing gear warning horn. Landing gear horn off switch. Landing gear horn off warning light blue. Pitot pressure switch. Flap position switch with reverse current diode. Throttle position switch with reverse current diode. Pitot pressure transistor with resistor. Pitot pressure relay with coil suppression diode. Landing gear down limit relay with coil suppression diode. Flasher relay with coil suppression diode. Landing gear down limit switch. Landing gear up limit switch. Landing gear up relay with coil suppression diode. Landing gear down relay with coil suppression diode. Landing gear actuator motor and gearbox with disconnect mechanism. Auxiliary fuel pump. Heated pitot. Anti-collision stroke light power supply combination. Anti-collision and navigation lights 3. Landing light 100 watt. Flap actuator. Instrument post lights 16. Glare shield lights 4. Light dimmers. Potentiometer, transistor, switch and resistor 2 each. Cylinder head temperature sender 4 senders optional. Oil pressure transducer. Oil temperature sender. Fuel quantity sender 2. Fuel guard transducer optional. Alternator analyzer transducer optional. Outside air temperature probe. Avionics. VHF WAR NavCom optional. VHF WAR LOC GS NavCom with localizer and glide slope optional. ADF optional. DME or RNAV optional. Marker beacon receiver with switch and 3 lights optional. Transponder optional. Altitude encoder optional. LoRaN navigation receiver optional. COM1 internal antenna. COM2 internal antenna. NAV internal antenna. NAV splitter. Marker beacon internal antenna. DME internal antenna. Transponder internal antenna. F8L Falco flight manual 1 to 7. L. ADF sense and loop antenna internal optional. LoRaN internal antenna with antenna coupler optional. Audio system components. Microphone push to talk switch 2, microphone jack 2. Headphone jack 2. Intercom voice actuated. Intercom microphone bypass switch, intercom phone bypass switch, microphone selector switch, COM1 audio selector switch, COM2 audio selector switch, NAV1 audio selector switch, NAV2 audio selector switch, marker beacon audio selector switch, ADF audio selector switch, DME audio selector switch. Controls. Control sticks dual. Rudder pedals dual. Elevator trim tab with indicator flap control with indicator landing gear switch. Emergency landing gear hand crank differential brake pedals pilot side only parking brake. Throttle control lever. Propeller RPM control lever mixture control lever. Throttle quadrant friction knob. Left hand throttle control lever optional cabin heat. Fresh air vents 2. Windshield defrost optional carburetor heat if applicable alternate air if applicable. Other equipment. Dry vacuum pump. Suction regulator with filter instrument filter. Alternate static source F8L Falco Flight Manual 1-8. L. Section 2. Operating limitations. The following limitations must be observed when flying the F8L Falco with Lycoming engine IO320B1A and Hartzell HCC2YL1BF F76634 constant speed propeller. Engine limitations. Maximum temperature. HP RPM oil cylinder head for all operations 1602700 245 degrees Fahrenheit 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Note, for 180 horsepower engines, avoid continuous operation between 2000 and 2250 revolutions per minute. Fuel. Minimum octane 100 and 130ths aviation gasoline. Usable capacity 21 US gallons in front tank, 19 US gallons in aft tank. 2 US gallons in inverted header tank if installed. Engine instruments markings. Oil temperature gauge. Normal temperature range green arc 100 degrees to 245 degrees Fahrenheit. Maximum temperature red line 245 degrees Fahrenheit. Oil pressure gauge. Minimum pressure red line 25 psi. Caution range idling yellow arc 25 to 60 psi. Normal operating range green arc 60 to 90 psi. Caution range warm up yellow arc 90 to 100 psi. Maximum pressure red line 100 psi. Fuel pressure gauge. Normal operating range green arc 0 to 7 psi. Maximum pressure red line 7 psi. Cylinder head temperature gauge. Normal operating range green arc 150 degrees to 435 degrees Fahrenheit. Caution range yellow arc 435 degrees to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Maximum temperature red line 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Tachometer. Normal operating range green arc 500 to 2700 rpm. Maximum rpm red line 2700 rpm. Oil quantity indicator. As indicated on the oil deep stick F8L Falco Flight Manual 2-1. L. Speed limitations TIAS. Utility acrobatic. Maximum speed VNE 208.5 knots 208.5 knots. Maximum structural cruise speed VNO 161 knots 161 knots. Maneuvering speed VA 122 knots 135 knots. Maximum with landing gear down 108.5 knots 108.5 knots. Maximum with flaps at 20 degrees VFE 97.5 knots 97.5 knots. Maximum with flaps at 45 degrees VFE 87 knots 87 knots. Airspeed indicator markings CAS. Red line, never exceed 208.5 knots. Yellow arc, caution range 161 to 208.5 knots. Green arc, normal operating range 65 to 161 knots. MA, maneuvering speed, acrobatic 135 knots. Mu, maneuvering speed, utility 122 knots. G, maximum with landing gear down 108.5 knots. Limit load factors. Positive, negative. Utility category 4.4 grams 2.2 grams. Acrobatic category 6 grams 3 grams. Accelerometer markings. Normal operating range, utility, green arc plus 4.4 to minus 2.2 grams. Maximum positive G, utility, red line, U plus 4.4 grams. Maximum positive G, acrobatic, red line, A plus 6 G. Maximum negative G, utility, red line, U, minus 2.2 grams. Maximum positive G, acrobatic, red line, A, minus 3 grams. Suction gauge markings. Normal operating range green arc 4.5 to 5.4 inches HG. Alternator amps markings. Alternator 70 amp, 60 amp. Normal operating range green arc 0 to 56 amp. 0 to 48 amp. Caution range yellow arc 56 to 70 amp. 48 to 60 amp. Maximum load red line 70 amp. 60 amp. Fuel quantity gauge markings. Front fuel quantity gauge. Green arc 3 to 21 US gal. Red arc 0 to 3 US gal. Aft fuel quantity gauge. Green arc 3 to 19-7/8 US gal. Red arc 0 to 3 US gal. Note: inverted header tank, if installed, increases capacity of aft tank by approximately 2 US gallons, which is not indicated on the gauge. F8L Falco Flight Manual 222.